Welcome everyone to our engineering hour. We'll do a quick introduction and then we will go through the questions which were submitted to us. I'll start to share my window.
Yeah, so find us here. I'm Tamas, senior software engineer at Bitrise. I'm working here a little bit less than 4 years now. And I can say I went through a lot of things with Viktor already in these years.
Whoa.
Yeah,
that's very mysterious.
Yeah,
but that's true. Yeah, we've been working together for a while now. And so, hi everyone. I'm Viktor Benei, CTO and co-founder. And indeed, there was a time where I was like actively working with the tooling team. At that time, it was called the tooling team, working on mainly the Bitrise CLI, Bitrise steps, and the open source ecosystem around these. Are you ready, Tamas?
Yeah, I'm absolutely ready. Yeah.
All right. First question. Oh, I'll answer this one. So, question is, most of existing CI tools have a concept of pipelines reporting back to Git PR. In Bitrise, the only way to achieve that is to spin up an extra machine in order to wait for other builds to finish. This works, but adds additional cost of an extra machine per pipeline just to report back to Git. Are there any plans to change that and make Bitrise more flexible? So, two things. The direct answer to the question is that yes, we do have plans. It's already in the works. We would love to release it very early next year. It's scheduled, so we just have to execute and implement it and finish the feature.
Yeah, basically we just need to all it. So do it all.
But yeah, it's already in the works. And it will be awesome. It will be way better than the other CI solutions. Joking aside, there's a workaround, as the question also mentioned. It's possible even today to trigger additional builds. So it's the, yeah, this doesn't really show it, but essentially you fan out the build and then you fan in, which means that the build starts like you do a Git clone, then you fan out to like running a test and also running like a build, be that a build or archive, and you want to do these in parallel at the same time. There's actually, I can share the link as well. Here it is. Okay. So that's the link. We have a step-based solution today, where if you add the Bitrise start the build step to your workflow, what that means or does is you can set another workflow to it, and then your build is already running, but that will also trigger a second build, and then those will run in parallel. And then there's the Bitrise wait for build step. So if you are like fanning out from this build, you add the wait here so that it will wait at this point until the second build finishes. And the question was, like it mentioned this solution, but this requires an additional machine, so the workaround right now would be to, after doing the split, you can still do things in the first one. So it doesn't mean that you have to add the start build step and right after that you add the wait for build step. You can add the start build step, then like run tests or generate the archive while the other build is running, and then wait for the other build. I know it's more complicated than it would be ideal, but that's why we are working on the actual built-in pipeline functionality, plus the additional like better overview of how things are branching out.
Yeah, so basically 2 builds to run 2 tasks should be possible this way. So you won't need a router build as a third one to manage the 2 builds this way. So then this way should cost no extra of any other machine.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the only note here is that it only, so ideally you add the more time-consuming steps to the build from which you are branching out. So you branch out, this finishes, the second build finishes sooner than the first build, which like this one is running tests and this one is doing archive. If archive takes longer than the test, then you don't lose any time. I see that there's now a question, and thank you for it. We will go continue with a couple of questions which were pre-submitted, and then we will switch to the questions that you are asking right now.
Okay, I think it's mine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So currently it take over 40 minutes for us just to build an IPA file, not submit, just build. We use Fastlane and Xcode 11.7. What is perfect and yet achievable IPA build time on Bitrise? We build circa 15 application per one release, and the 40 plus minutes with each app extend to really long time. Yeah, so basically what I always could say is to shorten a build will always depend on some kind of caching. I see you mentioned you are using Fastlane here. In about a couple of months ago, we released a Fastlane step version, which was 2.6.0. In which we introduced that it will collect Android dependency and Cartridge and Cocoa Pod dependencies. So a first improvement could be that if you did not yet, then you can update your Fastlane step version in your workflow. And beside of that, don't forget to add cache pull and cache push steps, because this is how it will make a caching properly. Cache pull will download your stored cache, and cache push will update your cache state in the cloud between your builds. And as you mentioned that you are building 15 application, then I would imagine some kind of parallel job, like what we just previously mentioned with the build start and build wait steps. It is possible that you can just parallelize these builds, so each application could be even a single concurrency, and that would means that you can divide your build time by 15. But even though if you just, for example, if you use 5 concurrency, then it's still third time. So so I think parallelization should be one of these solutions, but still 40 minutes is I understand that is long, but obviously there is always downsides, and caching has its own as well. So even if it takes a little long, I always suggest that the builds you need to have short is between the PR checks. That can have any cache, anything, any solution to make the build faster, because when you are updating your code base, you need the feedback of your test results as soon as possible. But when you are doing release and 15 application especially, I think the best approach is not to use or only dependency cache to be used. And the reason behind is that a fresh machine with an absolutely clean environment is the only way you can avoid build failures because of previous cache state. So, for example, a previous wrong cache state, or like a previous cache state, and then your new change can lead to a build which is going to be faulty. And unfortunately, if you do this in release builds, then the first time you will notice this when the users are start to write feedbacks or reviews in App Store, for example, which is not that good. So despite the time is really, really important, also using cache with with the absolute wise way is also important. And I can tell you why Xcode cache is really challenging on not only on Bitrise, but in any environment which is always fresh on each start. Your project is handled by Xcode in a way that that Xcode thinks that it's a project which has been created once, for example, and all the files have modification times, any stamps Xcode can check if the file is a new one or maybe a modified one. However, when you are starting a new machine and then you use Git to fetch your project, then it will lose all this information. So when you just git pull a repository to a fresh VM, then you can see that all the modification time will be the exact time when you git pull that, git cloned that project. And this is why Xcode thinks that in this project is all the files just modified a couple of seconds ago. And this is why it will completely rebuild the cache state basically. And we are thinking of this, how we can improve on this, but this is obviously this is by Xcode by design. So this is why it's a little challenging. And also you can speed up the builds, and in our reports with pretty good increases in performance, you can use elite machines. That would mean more CPU cores and more memory to build your project, and it also could speed up.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, we are always looking into possible solutions to improve caching as well as to speed up builds, both the raw performance. So today that's the elite machines, which are more like faster than the standard ones, but also the steps and the possibilities. But yeah, sometimes it's very complicated to resolve these. And in our case, we also started to work on a solution which was working nicely with, I think, Xcode 10 maybe, but then a change in Xcode 11 broke that.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's a constant fight and constant challenge.
This is what happens exactly. Like every single new Xcode version has a complete breaking change. Like for example, they change something in the cache file structure, so our previous solution just didn't or will not work with the next Xcode versions. And to keep up this cache logic handling with the latest Xcode versions is just not the way it should happen. So we are, as like Viktor mentioned, we will always work on this to find it out.
Yeah, and the pipeline system will also help in some cases, like anything that you can run parallel, that's always the best way, or you gain the most to do that versus optimizing certain things. Yeah, but in some cases it's not possible to break something up into smaller pieces. I know, but that's why we are also working on other things.
Viktor, what do you think about, just let's get back and answer the questions if they just relevant to the question we are answering maybe.
Yeah, I was checking. So start with using the cache step also adds up quite some time to upload the cache, even though there is no new modules or pods added, which adds up about 10 minutes. Is there a way to check if nothing has changed? Then no need for re-uploading them back.
Oh, I guess what you are meaning. Cache push step we designed in a way in which you can define paths you want to cache, and we also gave it an input to exclude stuff. For example, patterns, glob patterns. You can exclude file extensions, complete paths, bar, or whatever really. I think in your case, this means that might be in your build there is a log file, for example, created, and maybe because of the timestamps or any other reason, for example, these log files can be different, and so I think you should look around really what was the change in your cache in your build, and then if you find the relevant file which you find something changed and it is something that is not important for caching, for example, log files are not really important, and but they also can retrigger the cache building. So I think this is the first thing I would try.
Are the changed files are listed in the build log by default, or you have to enable the debug mode in the step? I'm actually not 100% sure.
Step just got some changes recently, so I'm not sure, but I think it is listed when debug mode is on. It should
step description.
Yeah, let's check that.
There is a debug mode, right?
Yes.
Step will print verbose logs.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but the point is that you should see what changes the cache push step detected during the build, because by default it should not upload the cache if there was absolutely no change. So the tactic here is to only cache the things, usually static dependencies, which aren't changing in every single build. To be able to debug that, the log should include it. If it would not include the cache push steps log would not include the list, you might have to enable this debug mode. You can do it on the UI. It's a toggle. Yes, true, false.
Yeah, switch. And there is also a manual way to compare cache states. If you open your application or your app on Bitrise and you go to the settings tab and you scroll completely down, then you can download the cache archive, which was generated in your previous or last build. You can download that, so you have the previous state, and then you can run another build. And if you see that the cache archive just regenerated, then you can, after the build finished, you can go back to the app settings. You can also download the latest cache archive. And if you unpack both of them, then you can compare with, for example, opendiff, which is a built-in command in macOS. You can compare the two directories to see which files are different. And then based on that differences, you can set up your ignore passes. I hope this helps.
The ignore passes that you're referring to are also part of the cache push step, right?
Yes.
Or
cache pass and exclude, include and exclude pass are under each. Yeah.
So you can define these on the UI in the workflow editor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe just a small addition that this cache push step handles two internal environment variables, which is Bitrise include cache pass and Bitrise exclude cache pass ems. And
you know this.
Yeah, and these ems are filled by steps we made, for example, Android build, Xcode archive or Cocoa pods or cartridge, these steps has a logic to put passes into this mvar to cache and the include or exclude pass as well into these mvars. And what you configure in cache push step, to that, it will be an extra addition. So you can add any pass there without breaking the built-in cache logic in our steps.
Should we answer the other question as well?
Yeah.
So the question is, recently, and thanks Erica for submitting it, recently I needed to fix the development and deploy workflows for an iOS application. It was extremely costly due to authentication with Apple. I missed the more comprehensive and detailed documentation. Do you intend to improve the documentation for iOS application workflows? I would like to commend the support team that supported me throughout the process. They are the best. Yes, they are. And yes, we definitely always keeping an eye on what we could improve in our documentation. The support team is part of the customer success team, and we are actively working on adding more people to it, being able to see recurring issues, and then improving the documentation, creating video tutorials, those kind of things. So yes, I think, yeah. Anything to add to that, Tommy?
That's what I wanted to mention as well, that support team is really helpful, and I also think that they are the best. As far as I remember, when they receive a support ticket about questions or concerns or something is not really straightforward, in their process of closing a ticket, they have a task to create to follow up and check if this is something we could describe more somewhere. So if you couldn't find the information right now, I'm pretty sure that the information will be there within a short period of time.
So for now, because we don't have more Q&A questions, feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A section in Zoom. Let's go with question number 3. Question is there any smart way to automate the code signing? Currently, we ask customers to provide us the provisioning profiles and Apple certificates. We upload them to Bitrise and mark on our calendar to request new ones upon expiration date. Can Bitrise help here? I took a note here. I will also share this link in the chat. If I can find it, yes, it's here. So we have this automatic provisioning where you still have to upload a certificate, and then you specify your Apple developer account credentials on Bitrise. The guide goes through the process. And then our builds will be able to generate, regenerate, update the provisioning profiles based on the project. That should help most of it. So for Apple certificates, we were discussing this with Tommy before the call. Apple certificate is required to be uploaded, but that doesn't have to be updated frequently or renewed frequently. The provisioning profiles are what usually causing issues, and that's why we wanted to automate that as quickly as possible. We have ideas how these certificates could also be automatically generated, but we ran into edge cases. So eventually, I would say we will definitely have a solution to automatically update the certificates as well.
Yeah, and actually, I think as Apple just did the Connect API, Apple Connect API, I think they are moving in a way when they will extend their API endpoints list, and then I'm pretty sure sooner or later they will start to support this. So then we can manage the certificates as well. Then hopefully we can have a solution to have this automated as well.
Yeah, hope for the best.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, they released the API a while ago, but it was very limited. They are adding new functionality to it, but it doesn't have all the features that you can do on the web UI, for example.
And not with the speed we need.
Yeah, that too. So question number 4. Currently, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes to build and submit an APK file to Play Store. Is there any chance to bring this time down? We build about 20 APK files per one release. It's very similar to the iOS ones. So usual things, best practices, do things in parallel as much as possible. Use dependency caching. But as we talked about, dependency caching very much like its efficiency depends on caching only the things which aren't constantly changing. Yeah. And there's also the elite machines option, which we will also extend over time, like adding even more powerful machines. Because I would like, it's not specifically mentioned here, but Android builds are by default running on Linux, which we are running in Google Cloud. So there are more performant options there. With Macs, it's way more complicated. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I think this parallel thingy is the best here. If you build 20 APKs per release, yeah, by parallel running them, you can really just split them like half for the build time or something. So I would definitely go with parallel running 20 APK builds.
Yeah. So that's the same link I shared in the chat for the first question. I'll reshare it again, which explains how you can trigger multiple workflows in parallel. Question number 5. I work with the hybrid stack for React Native. Anyway, builds are separate. Is it better to have workflow specific for Android and one for iOS, or one for both, since they share the same node modules directory?
Yeah, and actually parallel just came back again. I would also suggest to have Android and iOS builds in separate builds and running them parallel, because this way I understand that there is node module a download for each build then, but one of the builds can become running parallel with the other one. So your final build time will be definitely lower than running them after each other. I think, yeah. So I think this is better to have them separate, and yeah.
Yeah, parallel is always better.
Yes, parallel is parallel.
In this specific case, there's one more option which might be easier for some teams, depending on how you work or what you prefer. In addition to the link that we shared, you can also just register the same repository multiple times. So like you could register it once as a React Native Android and then as a React Native iOS project.
Yeah, and this way, this is a direct feedback. that when you just open a pull request, you can see 2 lines of feedback on the repository by GitHub. And then you can see if your Android or your iOS project had build issues, and then you can go there instantly. And maybe the configuration is a lot better if you keep them in separate. I mean, like iOS need a totally different provisioning like Android does. So I think that could be kept separate as well, or sounds like a good idea too.
Yeah, I think in most cases, that's a very solid solution.
Yeah,
Obviously,
yes,
there will be, some teams who prefer to have just one application on Bitrise for both, and then they can do the parallel workflows trick. Or next year, early next year, the pipeline-based version of it. Question number 6, how to cache only some steps for our workflow, like certificate installer or install missing Android SDK. They never change, so it makes sense to not repeat them every build.
Yeah, you might remember that previously, a couple of questions ago, we mentioned that cache push step works in a way where we can specify paths we want to be cached, and we can provide exclude paths or patterns what we don't want to be stored in the cache archive. And I just wanted to mention it because basically when we are doing cache, we are not caching steps exactly, but the artifacts they generate. So in case if we see these 2 steps and their artifacts, we can tell that certificate installer is can or couldn't really be cached because it downloads certificates and profiles. Certificates need to be downloaded and installed into the system keychain, which will lead to a keychain file change basically. So all we could do here is to cache the keychain or key store file, which is the OS's system default, but it will not work if you overwrite it in the next build, because these keychains are belong to a single machine. So it is not possible, and maybe the profiles could be cached, but I don't really think so that it worked, because those are single text files with a really small file size, just going to be downloaded. Actually, Victor, what got into my mind, I'm not sure about the logic behind in this step, but what we could do, because I imagine that who asked this question has many profiles maybe. We could check what happens with the step if we provide a lot of profile. Maybe
whether those are downloaded in parallel.
Yes,
or
exactly.
sequentially.
And guess what? Parallel back again.
Yeah, as always.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's it. We should check that.
Yeah, I made a note. Okay, and install missing Android SDK. This tab downloads platform images and every single dependency that is required for Gradle to be able to run in a state where it can figure out the dependency graph, which means that it will download Android SDK components, but not dependencies that you are using in your product. I don't think this is a really good idea to cache Android SDK components, because they are kind of big, and sometimes they have so many files in those directories. And if I remember well, it takes more time to compress them into a cache archive with also other files you are collecting in your cache. So it, as far as I remember, it takes less time to download the SDK components than storing it in an archive, uploading it, and in the next build you need to download. So
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So SDK components, I think, shouldn't be really cached. What need to be cached is the Android dependencies from Maven and G-Center or any other location, because cache in this scenario, cache has two main role. The first may be to have a little faster build, because then it's no need to be downloaded, unzipped, and moved to the proper location. Gradle will look for it. And the other side is that sometimes Maven and Bintray have network or system outages. And if you cache these Android dependencies, then you can avoid a failed build because of dependency that couldn't be downloaded, and all of our Android steps will automatically cache the dependencies. I think this is the default input settings, that the dependency cache is automatically on. You just need to make sure that cache pull and cache pull step is included in your workflow.
And that you use our Android steps, like the Android build. And
yes,
Android
exactly.
test.
Exactly.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that, like, a rule of thumb kind of thing is that if the cache would be over about a gig in size, so like 1 gigabyte or larger, that's usually where you cache things which would be faster to just download, because how the cache works is that the cache push step collects all the directories, files which are specified, compresses them, and then uploads it. So the next build will download it, uncompress it to move it to the location where they were in the previous build. But obviously this adds additional complexity to it. So it really depends on how much we can gain with compression. And if you are downloading binary, you usually, like a random installer or something, you usually won't really benefit from like faster downloads that much versus compressing and uncompressing.
Yes, and to be honest, it's not very easy to answer concerns about cache or cache speed thingy, because each project or each product has its own balance line. Every single project has a different scale. So for example, I've seen a huge project, really huge, like a lot of modules and really, and they had a cache of 3 gigabytes, and they could split their build time in half. But sometimes I see almost a dummy small project with 200 megabytes of cache, and then that takes more time than the build was originally. So I think each product has its own balance that need to be found, that which is where to be cached and which is not.
So in the meantime, there was a question from Carol. What about pre-installing more number of common dependencies in stack images? And you also said that something like Gradle. I'm not sure if you mean like multiple different Gradle versions for other dependencies. So when we create our images, and those processes are open source, it's on our GitHub. Depending on whether it's the Linux or the Mac OS one, if you search for it, you can find it. I think we documented it on the Dev Center as well. In any case, so the good target of something to be pre-installed is if that thing doesn't change too frequently. Otherwise, if it also takes a lot of space, we will end up with not having enough space. It also adds a lot of like virtual machine preparation times, which I know we only have to do it once, but if nobody is using a specific version of a tool, the trade-off isn't really there compared to, the space, for example, that it takes. Because all those space, and we have to be conscious about cost as well, but that space will be taken from you and from your project.
Yeah, and also what I can say honestly is that there might be some improvement in download times if we just pre-cache or pre-install maybe even like Gradle components or Maven or Bintray components. But what I see from the builds, these dependencies are changing incredibly fast. I mean, like maybe on Monday we can release a new VM image with the fresh dependencies, and I am pretty sure that within 2 days, almost, as I think most of them going to be not the latest one. So on the user builds, they will be still downloaded. And yeah, and the downside that it's also will lose some space from the user project space. So yeah,
That said, those images are open source, and we encourage everyone to send ideas what could be pre-installed. Just wanted to highlight that it's not always that super simple to just have these 500 different versions of something pre-installed and nobody using it. But it really depends on the tool. So in case of Gradle, I definitely can see that it might worth to install a couple of versions, or but yeah, then we also would need your help with, or we have to do our research, which kind of versions to have pre-installed. It might take some time, but if you can help us with that by providing these recommendations, then we would love that.
And also the same way like you previously did, as I know, Carol, you had a lot of pull requests sent in the same topic, and thanks for that as well.
Yeah, definitely appreciated.
Yes.
So next question. Is it possible to be notified when Apple certificates are expiring? I'll take this one. It's a short one, as in we don't have a built-in functionality for that right now. We were brainstorming with Tommy how we would do it. And it's definitely possible to use a script step and parse out the expiration date and check it, and if it's in the next week, then either send a Slack or an email notification. It's definitely a good question in that sense that we will think about how we could make this easier. And I think there were ideas that also depended on which certificate, because if you use the we had some ideas. Yeah, I got the message that we only have 10 minutes left. I still would like to highlight that if you have any questions, feel free to send that in. We have a couple of more minutes to answer those. But in the meantime, we will go with question number 8. Can I use the Bitrise CLI to set up a self-hosted CI server? The answer is that no, because that's not the Bitrise CLI like what that was designed for. The CLI is an environment-dependent runner, as you can see, but really its only purpose is that you provide a configuration, what it should do, and it will do it, and you can run it in all kinds of different environments. So it also means that it's the same tool that's running on Bitrise in the virtual machines, and you can also download it. It's open source and run the exact same configuration on your Mac or Linux machine. a bit more context, and we are thinking about, so we definitely have plans to provide a hybrid solution, which means that you still use Bitrise.io as the web UI, but you would be able to download an agent from us and install it on a Mac Mini you have, or on, or on a Linux machine, or on configure Google Cloud integration, and then the builds could run on your own Mac or your Google Cloud or AWS account. That's planned, but we don't have an ETA for that yet. One significant thing that worth a mention is that all of our tooling is requires a virtual machine-like environment. So an environment which starts from the same state every time and produces reproducible outputs. So other than what's cached through the cache pull and push steps, everything else is discarded. But again, we have ideas how we would do this hybrid setup. If you're interested in that, feel free to ping us, but it's still in very early days. So I would say, yeah, I don't really want to give an ETA because it's in planning stage. One more or two more? Question number 9. How can I put the Bitrise.yml file in a separate repository? I'll drop this link into the chat as well. Oh, not this. Oh, well. Well, this is the link I was looking for. So we have a step that if you download your Bitrise.yml into any repository, like there's a step where you can specify a location of the Bitrise.yml in a local file system, and it will run that Bitrise.yml for you. The usual setup is that you clone the repository and the Bitrise.yml file lives in the repository. So with the Bitrise run step, you can you don't really have to do anything else. You can just run your configuration from that Bitrise.yml file. If you want to store it in a separate repository, the only complication is that so don't use the git clone step. I should actually make it more like this, because I know that that would be obvious to use the git clone step, what clones the primary repository, the one that you registered on Bitrise. But the thing is that the git clone step assumes like it gets input automatically from the environment, like what you trigger it with, what you trigger that build with. Example, you push the code and like it's on the master branch, and there's also a commit hash. Then the git clone step will automatically read this information and it will check out that branch or that commit hash. And if you specify just a different Git repository URL, it will download from that URL, but it will still try to check out the same commit hash that triggered the build. I know it's a bit complicated, but long story short is that you should use the script step. It's usually as simple as git clone and then the repository. One thing though is that you have to make sure that it's also authenticated, but we have a guide for it. I shared it in the chat, which explains all of these.
At the same time, I just answered a question. It was in the Q&A. What we can use for Android similar to Hockey app. And as far as I remember from our customers, Test Fairy is getting more and more mentioned as an alternative. I think you could check that. Maybe you can use that instead of
Yeah, as well as
Yeah.
we have the ship add-on built into the system, which
Yeah.
can also be, I know it's not feature, like not the same just yet. We are working on that. But for a lot of use cases, it can be a real alternative. So we just got the information that we only have 5 minutes left. So very,
And
very quickly.
wanted to mention, sorry, just maybe Diavi or Diavi is also, I just type here.
If you search for deploy,
maybe Diavi,
right, and Android, we should have the list.
Yeah, should.
Android and deploy. Other than Amazon S3, Appaloosa, definitely. App Center.
Or why Haki
Oh yeah, we know.
deprecated? Actually, that's a good question. I think Hockey App has been purchased by someone. Do you know, Victor?
Yeah, sure. That's App Center. Like
Microsoft. Yeah, makes sense.
App Center is essentially the new Hockey App.
Oh, then App Center. We have App Center steps for that. Yeah,
I think we even had a migration guide somewhere on our blog.
Yeah, also we have that. I don't know how could I forget that. Sorry. So yeah, App Center,
no problem.
Definitely, and it was pretty easy to set up and use that, and it sends out the notifications for the testers. Easy to manage the tester groups and everything. So yeah, I can suggest that as an alternative.
App Library is also one of those great alternatives. Deploy Git. You mentioned Diavi. Diavi, I guess.
Oh, we have another question. Is it possible to add release notes to every build for test flight? I think so. I'm just checking the test flight step. Sorry. As far as I remember, it is possible to set note. Okay, I'm just checking the integrations. At the same time, Victor, you wanted to mention something. I don't want it to block you, sorry.
Yeah, no. All right. Yeah, new information is that we will have, we can go with the questions, like we can finish them. So in the meantime, while you're searching for that, you might as well answer this question. How are you so fast with publishing Xcode versions? How we do it, like automation, that's the very short answer. A bit more complicated than that, because Apple doesn't really make it that super simple to install Xcode automatically. So essentially what we do is we have multiple virtual machine images. So imagine we have an empty environment, and then we install macOS, a specific version of it, into the virtual machine. Then we save this as a virtual machine image in our system. And then when there is an Xcode version we want to make a stack for, we clone this base image as a new one. We install Xcode on it. Some parts are automated, some aren't yet. And then we save this as a new image. And from that point, we have a completely automated pipeline to pick this up, install like Brew or the pre-installed tools other than Xcode on this stack, save that as a new image, like that's essentially now ready for distribution. Then we automatically run a lot of tests, sample builds on it, and these are all automated, as in checking the results of these. And if it passes all the tests, it can go into the production system. If not, then we will have to check that stack. But that's essentially it. So automation.
Sorry. At the same time, I just found the answer. With the just 1 second, with the deploy to iTunes Connect step, I did not find a note field, to be honest, and quickly checked in Xcode as well. And in Xcode, you can't set the note as well, which is kind of interesting. So, and our application loader step is using our tool, this application loader, which is built in into Xcode.
Yeah, like that's the official tool for uploading.
Yes, but we have this older step, which is using Fastlane Deliver. I've seen a couple of inputs there, and I'm pretty sure that additional arguments can be provided. So I did not try deliver, to be honest, but that would worth to be checked if it's possible or not. But as I remember, with Fastlane it is possible, and Fastlane uses deliver, so then it should work that way.
Yeah. And it's also possible through ship or deployment add-on, but it's not it's not automated yet in a way that you can specify those metadata before submitting it to the App Store manually. It keeps track of those data, so you don't have to re-specify, and it can also re-sign your IPA, which might be like an ad hoc signed IPA that you test, and then you don't have to trigger a new build. In ship, you can trigger like a deploy to store, which will re-sign that IPA with App Store certificate. Well,
we just got a message that we need to say thanks for all the joiners, and we hope that we could answer the questions you sent us. Viktor, anything to add here?
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We will definitely pick up the questions that we did not answer yet. And in any case, feel free to ping us if you have any questions.